Welcome to the second official week of me doing spiritually and historically led ghost tours. I hope you don't mind. We are going to be going by some places that are lovingly decked out for the holiday season on our trek down to St. James Graveyard. Now, St. James Graveyard is something that you all voted on not long ago about a place that you wanted to go. Last month was the Bellamy Mansion. Part of that was on YouTube, and all of it was on Patreon. So let us make our way down to St. James Graveyard. Out of respect to the church and for our safety this evening, I did want to go before it got too dark. Alright, so I'm already picking up on the Guardian. This is usually where I meet him. Here's the gate. And I'm actually... May I film you? Yes, okay. So he's actually over here, a bit farther. Make your read, because I'm going to tell you what I'm seeing. So, he's very tall. And I would say more of a he, them pronoun. And honestly, about 9 feet. Long legs, long arms, spindly looking. Oh, I'm gonna show you this. It's a ladybug. I haven't seen a ladybug in a while now. Hello, friend. Okay. So, as I said, still roughly around here. I'd like to make an offering of a coin for safe passage while I walk these grounds. Yes, okay. So, isn't that gorgeous? Sunset is a beautiful time to come out here. Let us talk about the St. James Burial Ground. This is the oldest recognized burial ground in Wilmington, North Carolina. They broke ground here in 1757. Now, there's something very important to note about St. James. It's the oldest recognized burial ground. So that means that there were other burial grounds around the city. Now, there's a reason why Wilmington is so very haunted. It's because people had been burying their dead for a very long time. However, where are those people now, right? So let's start out with the Native Americans. There was a thriving Native American populace here. Unfortunately, due to a massacre that happened in the early 1700s, or perhaps it was the late 1600s, I would need to check those dates. All of those people were wiped out. Who was left, they went to neighboring tribes, and there's still research to be done about where exactly they went after that. It was terrible. They were burying their dead around here, right? So there are also the early settlers, people who had been here since the late 1600s. They were burying people out here. They were burying people out in Brunswick town as well, which is just across the river. It's a town that's now deserted, but is older than Wilmington. So once again, where are all of the buried people? Everywhere. They're everywhere. Why is Wilmington so haunted? It's because we have buildings that run through people. There's a lot of lore with our burial grounds here in Wilmington, and this one is no exception because it used to be bigger. And I'm wondering if any of you caught up on that or caught on to that, because this is actually a relatively small portion of how big this graveyard used to be, because for a while it was the only recognized one. And of course, Episcopal churches were the Church of England at that time, right? So this would have been the main church to go to in this area, okay? So what happened? Why is the graveyard not as large as it used to be? Expansion of the town, to say the least. So what was going on? Well, for one, the Civil War. The Civil War was going on. During that time, basically, once the Union came up and it feels weird talking about this here. Like, anyway, I'll let them pass. Yeah, there are a few that are already like, you're inside today. Yeah. When I used to do tours, we would always do it from the sidewalk, but so yeah, after the Civil War, or I should say after the fall of Wilmington, the Union comes up and it's now a part of the Union. North Carolina is now part of the Union again. And Wilmington, they want to make it booming again, because not only was this a thriving port city even before the Civil War, it was also a thriving railroad city. And on top of that, this was a unique place because after emancipation, many free black people were coming to this city to get work. After the Civil War, this was a thriving example of what could happen with giving people freedom, because people were owning land, they were owning businesses, they had thriving families, they were taking up jobs as doctors and lawyers and politicians. It was a really exciting place to be at that time, depending on what side of the war you were on. That being said, and you may have mentioned or you may have noticed before the coup d'etat that I mentioned before, we walked by a plaque, all of that ended in one day. So if you're interested in looking at that, review the video, go look up the Wilmington coup of 1898. Going back to this graveyard. So they're deciding to expand the town, and they say, ooh, this graveyard, it's in a great location. We want to put houses there. So that's what they do. There are houses right across the street. Yeah, guess what used to be there? So, okay, if you're thinking, whoa, all those people are buried on, like, they just started to take down gravestones and put up houses? Not exactly. When Wilmington was reclaimed by the Union, that is when the Union, they wanted to know what was going on during the Confederacy times during those years. And so they got as much documentation from government buildings, from private institutions, from churches as they possibly could. And they got all of it together, they put it in a box, and they sent it up to Washington, D.C. Part of the documentation was where everybody was buried. Where is that documentation? Last I checked, nobody knows. It was post-war, there was a lot going on, right? Now, some of the people were wealthy enough to have stones, such as all of these people here. However, over time, when you think about it, from a 100-year period, that's, even then, stones start to weather down from the elements, right? So you could have a stone and they might know where you are. What if you got a nice, really nice wooden cross? And let's say a hurricane rolled through and that cross just wound up in somebody else's yard one day. We didn't know where the cross went or something like that. And then the documentation was left somewhere and they don't know where. How would they know where you were buried? On top of that too, if you're thinking, oh, well, they had families to remember them. War, it killed a lot of people. And on top of that, the yellow fever epidemic also killed a lot of people. Also, other sicknesses were going on for over a 100-year period. It was the colonial period. There was a lot of ways to lose records, so to speak. So I'd like to think that they moved all the people that they could. And they moved them out to Oakdale, which we may visit at another time, during the daytime. I did a TikTok video there when it was a nighttime tour, but otherwise it's closed at night. They moved everybody they could. Though you also have to remember, excavating bodies, especially the older they are, is very particular and can get very expensive because it takes a long time to do. So I would like to think that they moved all the people that they knew about in good faith. That doesn't account for anybody else, right? So this street out here, likely on top of bodies. Those houses over there, likely on top of bodies. I know they're haunted. Now let's get into some well-known ghost stories about this location. The most known story about this location is a man named Samuel Jocelyn. Now, depending on who you talk to, they will give you different information on what was really going on that night, what actually happened. Was it a snowstorm? Was it his horse? Was he in a relationship that went down and then he got on his horse and got in a snowstorm? Here's the facts of the matter. He died. That's how much we know. He died. He was found frozen. And back in those days, this was 1810, I believe, and you didn't keep your dead for very long. There was no great way to preserve them. So within hardly 24 hours of finding him, they did bury him. Now, here's where the lore comes in. His best friend, who was understood to have psychic abilities, and I'm being joined by a squirrel right now, he saw his best friend rise up from the grave and tell him to dig him up. Now, depending on which story you hear and who you talk to, this happened to this friend for 3 nights. Just every night. Dig me up, dig me up, dig me up, dig me up. So, in the cover of darkness, he and a friend, a mutual friend of Samuel Jocelyn, come out here and dig up their friend. And that's when they find proof of the friend having been buried alive. And once again, depending on who you talk to, you may get the lore of nails in the coffin and blood and all of that. And sure, that would make a lot of sense. So it is said that he may or may not haunt this area. Here's the thing. After he was dug up and the mystery was solved, essentially, I would hope that his soul would just simply move on instead of just roaming around the graveyard. But some people, some lore will say that he is still roaming around, reminding people of what happened to him. But really, I think it was rather effective that he was able to reach out to his friend, and his friend was able to follow directions, and unfortunately they were not able to get to him before he actually died down there. But ultimately, it is a cool story of psychic ability, and it is well known that that is what happened. It was a psychic connection that happened either that night or those nights. Now, here's what I can tell you as far as known hauntings in this area. People have seen shadow figures, certainly. People have seen orbs. I've caught some pretty interesting photos when I was doing ghost tours, people on my tour catching photos, and some of those are already up on TikTok and some of those are on YouTube. And one of the more telltale things that happens out here is a kind of pink or reddish smoke or fog. Now, if you scroll all the way back to the very first YouTube video that I did, people saw this. They saw it in live time. They saw it gather up behind Jay and me, and then when we said that we were about to leave for the evening, they saw it taper away. Some people saw faces in this fog. It's very fascinating. And people have captured this primarily in photos, but they've also captured white fog in photos, and they've also captured these sort of like light beam sort of phenomena that sometimes pop out of the ground. It's curious how they would be. It doesn't look as if they would be orbs just by the way that they're moving, though I'm not a paranormal investigator and I do not pretend to be. So I'm going to tap in a little bit further. I mentioned out there at the fountain when I was talking to some folks, there are usually some guys there. 2 on one bench, 1 on another. They seem to be from different time periods. Early 1800s, and looks like closer to mid 1800s between the 3 of them. Those guys have also been seen by a friend of mine. If you are up to date on the TikTok lore that is my life, the guy that I was showing around, who is like another grandfather to me, when I talked to Rupert the first time after having moved back into town, he was the one to see Rupert, and that was the one that Rupert said, she's my wife. Fun facts. So, from a past life anyway. Catch up on the lore. Anyway, so he also saw these guys. I don't think they're out there all the time, but it's interesting that when I was out with him, it was roughly the same time of day when he and I were walking around. It looks different when I'm pointing the camera. So roughly around there is a guy that likes to quite dramatically rise up out of the ground and rush people. This has happened once by myself, once with it was actually one of you, and you will know who it is, who's down here visiting, where we were rushed. And it's also happened to other people. Kid, I know, who I've talked about on the channel before, happened to Kid. And this is the one where I created this sort of energetic bubble and then shoved it. So yeah, he likes to rush people. It's the thing that he does. He's not doing it right now, though. I'm getting a few grumbles. Don't know who he is. I hope he's living his best afterlife. That's all I can hope for him. But he is absolutely freaking out people. Is he necessarily evil? No. He's not like the thing that was in the basement that I told you about that Cat took care of. But yeah, he scares people. He's scary. He oftentimes will like just stand around, and as soon as like he realizes you're looking at him. So I'm glad my energy was effective. And if you're wondering what I did, basically what I did with my shield, and it was a bit different of a shield at the time, but similar idea, pulled up my shield, and then I popped him. Because nobody got time for that. I've learned a lot since I did ghost tours out here, but I always enjoyed coming out here. I always enjoyed telling the stories, and I always felt welcome. And not everybody feels this way. Some people feel very uncomfortable out here. And you know, for what it's worth, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, everything was perfect and I was never threatened. No. I tell a story about a being that followed me home, and it was either from here or it was from St. James. That was the one that caused sleep paralysis, and I hadn't had that since I was a child. The sleep paralysis was so bad, I was having bad dreams. I woke up and I had this terrible voice in my head telling me that I couldn't wake up Jay, it wouldn't matter, because he and I had a disagreement before we went to sleep, which we typically always solve things before we go to sleep, but it was just adding to this terrible energy. I don't even know exactly what it looked like. It was just like this awful energy, but it had like teeth to it. I remember I woke up and I couldn't move, and I was checking with Jay, and I was like, Jay, like I was trying to cry out to Jay, and I just kept hearing, he doesn't care, which is incorrect. It doesn't matter what we fought about. He always cares. It's like when people got your back, one fight doesn't overwrite years of time together. On top of that, I could hear Mira, because she was with us at the time. She was crying in her sleep because I was just like, oh, I'll just call her over here. And I was like, she can't hear you. It was terrible. I saw the shadow move across the wall. And then my smoke alarm went off because Gertie, the house ghost, which eventually I'm going to make a TikTok about this, and Jay's going to help because he is Gertie. He's the best Gertie. Gertie doesn't look anything like him, by the way. But yeah, she set off the smoke alarm, and basically that was a warning to be like, get him out of the house. Get this being out of the house. You brought this in, you take care of it. And while it was really scary at the time, I'm really grateful for her. And we made her a promise that day. We said, we're going to be more careful about what we do, where we go, and what we allow to follow us. So yeah, that energy may have come from here. It wasn't human, something else. So once again, just putting it out there. It's not like nothing bad can happen, especially at the time. I didn't have grounding tools. I didn't have shielding tools. I was just opening up as a medium, and I didn't know what to do, which is why I talk so much on my platform about things that people can do and ways that they can be safe, so you don't have to be afraid, so you don't have to have the scary experiences, hopefully, that I had. But no, for the most part, it's the same idea. It's like one bad experience, now that it's handled, it's not going to overrate the experiences that I've had out here, folks that I've met. I like it out here. Most of the time. Every now and then I get feelings that it's just like, oh, time to go. And I'm respectful of that. I could have walked down here and the graveyard spirit could have been like, nope. Thank you. All right. Well, I'm going to leave this running for a little bit. Catch the sunset at St. James on a beautiful day. Remember that for those of you on the workshop tier, we're going to be talking about what your reads are at the workshop. And hey, if you're watching this after that has been posted, go back on there. And if you're a part of a tier where you can watch that viewing, see what you got. For those who are solely watching on YouTube, you're welcome to leave comments on what you're getting. And as always, huge thank you to my Patreon.